Jeremy pauses at the bustling entrance of the glamorous Green Ranch Casino, heart thumping wildly. Neon lights reflect off polished marble floors, and the distant chatter of gamblers creates a tense backdrop. He clutches 3 counterfeit chips tightly in his sweaty palm inside his jacket pocket, eyes darting suspiciously at casino security guards near the door. He takes a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves, and steps forward into the brightly lit gambling hall. Jeremy's eyes anxiously scan the area, noting every security camera and guard. He approaches the busy cashier counter, muscles tense, jaw clenched. With a practiced nonchalance, he slides the 3 chips onto the counter. The cashier picks up the chips, pausing momentarily to inspect them. Jeremy holds his breath, fingers twitching slightly, ready to flee at any sign of suspicion. After what feels like an eternity, the cashier nods casually, sliding 3 crisp $100 bills under the glass partition. Jeremy releases a silent sigh, swiftly pocketing the cash and turning away before his nerves betray him. Jeremy bursts through the casino doors, nearly sprinting to Morikawa's parked car. He flings open the passenger door and jumps in. "Jeremy, drive. Go now." Morikawa slams the gas pedal, tires screeching as they speed out of the lot. "Morikawa, did they spot you?" Jeremy grins widely, pulling out the money. "Jeremy, they bought it." Morikawa laughs in disbelief and relief, their excitement palpable as they vanish into the neon glow of Las Vegas. Our story today is about gambling. Of course, gambling is one of those fields that's strongly associated with evil, pure evil. That's because casinos and their owners have only one goal in life: to make as much money as possible at the expense of destroying people's lives. So honestly, when someone comes along and tries to rob them, trick them, or scam them, you kind of feel like rooting for him, even though you know this person is definitely going to run into serious trouble. And that's exactly who we're going to meet in today's story. A man named Eric Morikawa, an American of Japanese descent. In 2000, Morikawa moved to Las Vegas. Now, Las Vegas is well known as the gambling capital of America. Some even say it's the gambling capital of the world. But Morikawa didn't move there to get into gambling. He moved to Vegas to work in construction. He was a builder by trade. And at that time, in 2000, the city's hotels, casinos, and tourist spots were expanding rapidly. So there were tons of opportunities in construction. With the boom in demand, Morikawa started his own small contracting company. He began hiring workers and taking on projects, some small, some big. One day, after a long, exhausting day on the job, Morikawa went to a game hall to relax and play some pool and snooker. There, he met a man named Jeremy Lewis. They started chatting, and Morikawa found out that Jeremy was looking for work, but his criminal record was holding him back. Any employer who ran a background check would instantly see his history: drug-related charges, forgery, and that he'd even been arrested multiple times. So no one would hire him, even for hard jobs with low pay. Jeremy told Morikawa all about his financial struggles. He'd been trying to find a job but was having no luck, and said he was willing to do anything just to earn a living. Morikawa, who had his own small contracting company, felt that Jeremy was motivated and genuinely wanted to work, so maybe he could help him out. He told Jeremy about his company and that he was looking for workers. He offered to train him and give him a job. All Jeremy had to do in return was put in the effort and work hard. Jeremy was thrilled and immediately agreed. He promised to live up to Morikawa's expectations, and he did. Jeremy started working in Morikawa's company and proved himself to be hardworking. The business grew, the company expanded, and Morikawa and Jeremy became close friends. They worked together for several years, and everything was going great, until 2004. In that year, everything changed. The construction and real estate market in Las Vegas took a hard hit. Demand suddenly plummeted, and many contracting companies began to struggle or shut down, including Morikawa's. They could barely find enough work to cover their expenses and support their families. They had to rely on loans and debt, and even started taking jobs far outside their area, basically chasing whatever work they could find. One day, when Morikawa was coming back from work with Jeremy, they were driving down the street when they saw a billboard for one of the Las Vegas casinos. The billboard read, "Are you ready to win big?" Next to the text was a large round chip with $5,000 written on it. That round piece is called a chip, and it's the currency used in casinos. So when someone goes to a casino, they don't just start gambling with their regular cash. First, they have to exchange it for casino chips. These chips come in different denominations. There are $1 chips, $5 chips, $25, $100, and even chips worth massive amounts like $5,000 or even $25,000. The design of these chips varies from one casino to another. Each has its own style and colors. But generally, chips look and feel similar. Colorful round discs with the value printed on them. So basically, when someone enters a casino, they're expected to trade in their cash for chips, use the chips to gamble, and then before leaving, whether they've won or lost, they need to exchange any remaining chips back into real money. These chips, by the way, are manufactured by specialized companies, and the process is kept secret. Only people who work in that industry are supposed to know how it's done. When Morikawa saw the billboard with the giant chip on it, he turned to his friend Jeremy and asked, "Do you think making a chip like the ones they use in casinos would be hard?" Jeremy thought for a bit and said, "I don't think it'd be that hard. I mean, it's just a plastic disc with some colors and a number on it. What are you thinking? Do you have something in mind?" Morikawa replied, "Man, look at the situation we're in. We can barely find work. We're drowning in debt because of this crisis. I've been thinking about any way we might be able to make some money. Sometimes I get these ideas that feel wrong, but at the same time, I feel like I want to try them." As soon as Jeremy heard that, he smiled. Memories of his criminal past immediately came flooding back. One of the charges he had been imprisoned for was forgery. He used to forge IDs and counterfeit money. So now, when Morikawa brought up the topic, it brought back those memories and got him excited. He looked at him and said, "So you're saying you want us to try making chips like the ones they use in casinos?" Morikawa hesitated a little. He had always lived as a straight guy, earning his money honestly through hard work. But then he thought of his family, his kids, and the debts piling up on him. He brushed aside the good thoughts and said, "These casinos and their owners are all crooks and thieves anyway. They make their profits by tricking people and ruining lives. They deserve to be stolen from. Why not?" And of course, Jeremy immediately encouraged him and said, "I'm with you." Jeremy, of course, didn't need any justification. He was always ready to flip to the dark side at any moment. But Morikawa needed to rationalize it to himself. He convinced himself he'd be a kind of honorable thief, a thief who steals from other thieves, namely, the casinos. And that's where their plan to counterfeit the round casino chips began. The first thing they did was visit several casinos and buy different chips with different colors to study them and examine their properties. As a customer or player at a casino, you can buy chips and even take them home. But these chips have no value anywhere except at the casino that issued them. You can always return to the casino later and exchange them for cash. Morikawa and his buddy Jeremy took the chips back to their workshop, which was set up in Morikawa's garage. They started examining the chips closely, even forcefully prying some open to see what was inside and analyze the materials. The chips are made from a mix of plastic, sand, clay, ceramic, acrylic, and small amounts of rare earth metals. They're manufactured using high heat and intense pressure to reach their final form. Of course, this process requires specialized machines that cost millions. The exact method is a closely guarded industry secret. There's a precise formula of materials, temperature and pressure that has to be followed to produce chips like the real ones. So even if Morikawa and Jeremy figured out the materials, actually making convincing counterfeit chips would be nearly impossible without those specialized machines and precise calibrations. But Morikawa was a craftsman. He worked in construction. So naturally, he was going to give it a try. They got their hands on some of the materials, like sand, clay, and plastic, and tried to make their own chips using cheap tools. To make their chips resemble the real ones, they had to get the weight and feel just right. Casino chips have a particular feel, neither rough nor smooth. If they couldn't match that, anyone with experience could tell just by holding the fakes. And sure enough, they managed to produce a few chips and even got the weight and hand feel pretty close to the real thing. From the outside, they looked like excellent replicas. But there was one problem: the sound the chip made. A real chip, when you throw it on the ground, makes a plasticky sound like it's hollow inside.
In order to pass, the fake chips must have the same weight, feel, and the hollow sound that real chips make when they're dropped.
But the fake chip they made gave off a heavy sound, like a stone.
The team do their own sound tests. This is the real chip, and this is the imposter.
The difference was obvious, even though they nailed the weight and feel, at least according to Morikawa. The sound gave them away. And that was a big issue. It meant their chips were never going to pass. There was no way they'd fool casino staff with those. Morikawa and Jeremy kept trying to make casino chips using different methods, but nothing seemed to work. After all their attempts, they gave up. They realized they just weren't going to be able to replicate the casino chips by hand and would need to find another way. Most of the chips they were studying came from a casino called Green Ranch, which is considered one of the oldest resorts in Las Vegas, a big and well-known hotel and casino. They spent hours and days examining and breaking down these chips to understand how they were made. Each chip denomination had a different color. For example, on the right, you can see the $1 chip, which had a gray base color with turquoise stripes on the sides. On the left, there's the $100 chip, which also had a gray base but with black stripes instead. So after failing to make full replicas of these chips, Morikawa got a different idea. Why not take the $1 chip and turn it into a $100 chip? After all, both chips were made of the same materials, had the same weight, the same feel, the same shape. Everything was identical except for the color and the number printed on them. So he figured it would be easier to just change the number and color rather than build a chip from scratch. The first step was to remove the number printed on the chip, that circular label in the center that said $1. This circle was made of shiny plastic paper glued onto the chip. The best way to remove it was to apply heat. After a lot of trial and error, they found that the best method was to boil the chip in water. Over time, the center circle would loosen without damaging the chip itself. This gave them a clean, original chip they could now modify however they wanted. The next step was to mimic the color of the $100 chip. They went to art supply stores, bought various paints, and started mixing them to match the exact shade used on the chip. This wasn't easy. It took many attempts. They painted the $1 chip fully in gray, then checked the color under different lighting: home lighting, sunlight, flash lighting. The shade and shine had to match exactly. Even the paint layer had to be thin so it wouldn't create a noticeable texture or buildup. They used spray paint for a smooth coat and eventually achieved an excellent result. Once they nailed the base gray color, the next step was to replicate the side stripes. The easiest way was to cover the areas they didn't want painted with masking tape, spray the exposed areas, and then remove the tape. The result looked very close to the original $100 chip. Of course, it wasn't a perfect 100% replica. There were some minor differences, but the average person wouldn't notice. Now that the colors were done, the final step was to replicate the inner circle with the $100 label. This was the easiest part of the whole process. They used a scanner to take an image of the original chip, uploaded it to a computer, and printed it. But they didn't print it on regular paper. They used glossy plastic paper that matched the original look. It was also a bit thicker than normal paper, and they used a thin layer of glue to attach the new label to the chip. In the end, they had what looked like a $100 chip that was visually identical to the real one. These chips had a hidden security feature. When placed under UV light, a glowing mark appeared in the center in the shape of a magician's hat. Morikawa got a pen with the same kind of invisible ink that only showed under UV light, and hand drew a symbol that resembled the hat from the original chip. The location of this mark didn't have to be precise since it was randomly placed on authentic chips. And just like that, the counterfeiting process was complete. They had figured out how to make chips that looked exactly like the real thing. In total, they produced 3 fake $100 chips. Morikawa and Jeremy decided to go to this casino called Green Ranch and test whether the fake chips they had made would actually fool the casino staff or not. No matter how confident they were in their work, it was still a nerve-wracking situation. Morikawa was too much of a coward to even try. He knew he couldn't lie. If he attempted it, he'd panic and give himself away immediately. But on the other hand, his friend Jeremy, with his criminal background, was totally ready to take on the mission and play the part. So Jeremy took the 3 fake chips and walked into the casino. He went straight to the cashier, the people who exchange cash for chips. With full confidence, he handed them the 3 chips. The cashier quickly inspected them and handed him $300 in return. For Jeremy, that might have been the best $300 he ever made in his life. He had literally handed them a few pieces of plastic and walked away with real money. Meanwhile, Morikawa was waiting for Jeremy in the car, nervous and on edge. Suddenly, Jeremy flung the car door open and jumped in, shouting, "Go! Go!" He kept looking over his shoulder like someone was chasing him. Morikawa's anxiety spiked. He started the engine and drove out of the casino parking lot as fast as he could. Once they hit the road and felt like no one was following them, Morikawa turned to Jeremy, stressed, and asked, "What happened? Did they catch on to you?" But before he could even finish the question, he saw Jeremy holding up $300 and grinning. Instantly, Morikawa got it, and they both burst into laughter. Morikawa and Jeremy were overjoyed, especially since at that time they were going through some really tough financial circumstances. Debts, lack of work, constant money stress. Riding the high of that moment, they rushed back to their little workshop in Morikawa's garage and got right back to making more chips. Each of them could make a new chip in just 10 minutes. It was that easy. But of course, they knew they needed variety. They couldn't keep targeting the same casino over and over, or they'd start drawing attention. Casino chips vary from place to place. While they're generally the same size, weight, and material, the colors differ. So Morikawa and Jeremy gathered all the paints and dyes they could find and started mixing and experimenting with colors until they got the exact shades. The process was similar to what they'd done before, but with different color patterns and occasionally extra details, like glitter on some chips, which they also had to replicate. Believe it or not, they eventually managed to forge chips from 8 of the biggest casinos in Las Vegas. Not a single major Vegas casino was safe from them. Diversifying like that was essential to keep suspicions at bay. But even that wasn't enough. If they kept cashing in fake chips without actually gambling, sooner or later the staff would catch on. So they tweaked their strategy. Instead of going straight to the cashier, they started using the chips to play. After all, chips are the casino's currency. You can use them at any game table. So they would win and lose like regular players, and by the time they went to cash out, there'd be no reason to suspect anything. Just so you know, casinos are packed with surveillance cameras and have entire teams dedicated to watching those feeds and keeping an eye on players to make sure no one's cheating. So Morikawa and Jeremy had to be extra careful to avoid drawing attention. One clever trick they used was going to a game table, like blackjack, poker, or something similar, where the dealer has a stack of chips in front of them. Players can buy chips directly from the dealer by handing them cash. Why do casinos allow this? It's to keep players hooked. If someone loses all their chips, they don't have to walk all the way back to the cashier. They can just hand cash to the dealer and keep playing. It makes it easier for the casino to keep them gambling. So Morikawa and Jeremy would buy chips directly from a dealer and play for a bit. Then, they'd leave the casino with the real chips, go to their car in the parking lot, away from surveillance, and swap them with their fake chips. After that, they'd head back inside and exchange the fake chips for real cash. That way, if they ever got caught, they could just point to the table they bought the chips from and say, "We got these from that dealer right there." Check the cameras if you don't believe us. It was a smart move to make sure that even if they got busted, they couldn't be held accountable. Morikawa and Jeremy kept going with what they were doing. Every day they were counterfeiting chips worth thousands of dollars. And they didn't just stick to the $100 denomination. Sometimes they even faked $500 and $1,000 chips. Just imagine, from a single chip, a piece of plastic, they could make $1,000. The money kept flowing into their pockets, and their wealth kept growing and growing. Of course, with wealth comes a change in lifestyle. Life starts to become more luxurious, and the two began to indulge in material desires. Morikawa was married, and his wife quickly noticed the sudden financial shift. Her husband started taking her and their daughters to fancy restaurants, buying her all the clothes she wanted. Anything she wished for, he got it for her. They no longer struggled with debt or household bills. Not long ago, they were barely getting by, so how did things change so drastically, so suddenly? She began to question him. Where did this money come from? But Morikawa kept dodging the question, telling her they had found new clients at work and signed big construction contracts, and that things had improved for their business. He kept insisting the money was from their contracting company. Morikawa had a feeling his wife was suspicious, but she was also one of the biggest beneficiaries of this newfound wealth. She started buying the fanciest brands, handbags, and shoes. Over time, she stopped caring about where the money came from, as long as she was enjoying it.
She was getting new purses, clothes. At one point, I counted 100 pairs of shoes in boxes in a closet. So, yeah, she was benefiting from it too.
Things continued this way for 3 months. Morikawa kept producing fake chips, and his family was enjoying their new rich lifestyle. But on the other hand, Jeremy took things to a whole different level. He dove headfirst into his desires. He would rent luxury hotel suites, each one the size of a house. For example, in a well-known hotel in Las Vegas called the Riviera, he would rent the biggest suite for up to $1,000 a night. Jeremy spent all his time partying, drinking, doing drugs, and surrounding himself with women. Even Morikawa noticed that whenever he saw Jeremy, his eyes were red and surrounded by dark circles from lack of sleep. He was always high or drunk. One day, while they were working on some counterfeit chips, Morikawa heard Jeremy talking loudly on the phone. It sounded like he was arguing, and from the way he was talking, it was obvious he was speaking to a woman, and it was clearly about money. Jeremy was saying things like he gave her more than she deserved, and that she had no right to ask for more. Morikawa was listening in and was confused by what he was hearing, so he moved closer to Jeremy to understand what was going on. Jeremy, still on the phone, snapped it shut and turned to Morikawa, saying, "I messed up." Morikawa asked, "What happened?" Jeremy replied, "I met this girl, and now she's threatening to expose us to the police if I don't give her money." Shocked, Morikawa pressed further. "What do you mean expose us? What does she know?" Jeremy looked down at the floor like a child caught doing something bad and admitted, "I was trying to get close to her, so I told her what we were doing. I thought she'd be impressed, but now she's turned on me and is demanding money." Morikawa couldn't believe what he was hearing. Furious, he said, "You told her that easily? Are you crazy? Even my wife doesn't know, and she is my wife. And you go and tell a complete stranger. What were you thinking?" Jeremy had no response. He just stared at the floor in silence. Morikawa didn't know what to do, so he said, "Give me the phone. Let me talk to her and find out what she wants." On the phone, the woman confirmed everything to Morikawa. She said, "I know what you two are doing. If you want me to stay quiet, pay me." Now, because of Jeremy's foolishness, not only did he get himself into trouble, but he dragged his partner down with him. And they were being blackmailed. At that point, Morikawa saw no other way out except to pay the woman off to keep her quiet. So they actually gave her around $10,000. But if the matter had ended there, it would have been for the best. The problem was, Morikawa knew this woman would get greedy and ask for more. And sure enough, just a few days later, she came back and started blackmailing them again, demanding a bigger amount. Once again, Morikawa had no choice but to pay her. But this time, he made it very clear to her this would be the last payment. No matter what threats she made, they wouldn't give her a single cent more. He told her that if she saw them giving in every time she asked, they'd end up like puppets in her hands. She'd keep pushing and demanding more and more. And apparently, his way of handling it worked. She stopped contacting them for a while and didn't ask for anything else. So Morikawa assumed she was satisfied with the money she'd gotten and would stay quiet. Now he and Jeremy could get back to focusing on their business. And that's exactly what they did. Morikawa and Jeremy went back to their routine, forging a new batch of chips each day and exchanging them for cash. Then one day, specifically on April 1st, 2005, Morikawa heard a knock at his door. He opened it to find a man in a suit. The man said, "Sorry to bother you, but my son was playing with his friends, and it seems they accidentally threw the ball into your backyard. Would you mind getting it for us, if that's okay?" The man was friendly, smiling, and very polite. Morikawa said, "Of course, no problem at all. Just give me a second. I'll go get it." But as Morikawa turned his back to go get the ball, the man followed him inside, suddenly grabbed his hands, and arrested him. Right after that, more people emerged from the bushes and entered the house, all armed and carrying guns. These were enforcement agents from a government agency called the Gaming Control Board. Just imagine. In a place like Las Vegas, in the state of Nevada, they actually have entire government agencies focused solely on gambling-related crimes. That's how massive the gambling industry is over there. So what happened was this. The woman who had been blackmailing them didn't like the way Morikawa spoke to her when he told her that was the final payment, and that no matter how much she threatened them, she wouldn't get another dime. To get revenge, she went and reported them. After she filed the report, the Gaming Control Board launched an investigation. Using surveillance cameras in the casinos, they were able to track Morikawa and his partner Jeremy, and they managed to get hold of some of the counterfeit chips. They confirmed the chips were fake, and based on that, they were able to issue search and arrest warrants for both Morikawa and Jeremy. After Morikawa was arrested, the house and the workshop they were working in were searched. Sure enough, they found all the evidence confirming the case. They were in the middle of carrying out a massive counterfeiting operation. Government agents were shocked by the scale of the operation. The tools, machines, paints, dyes, even the computers, printers, papers, and materials they had, along with a large number of casino chips from different casinos and in various denominations. It was just a small workshop in a house garage, but it had everything they needed to execute their wild scheme. What surprised the agents even more was the quality of the counterfeit chips. The imitation was incredibly good. Some of these chips were nearly impossible to distinguish from the originals. Perfect replicas. Just imagine. 2 construction workers managed to put the entire gambling industry at risk, an industry that generates tens of billions in annual profits. Now the authorities have to come up with a quick solution before this problem gets worse, because if these 2 men could pull it off, then others could too. Morikawa and Jeremy were placed in custody, and 3 days later, they stood before a judge. Imagine this. The judge set their bail at $5 million, an insane amount. Even the most hardened criminals don't get bail that high. This just shows how powerful and deep-rooted the gambling industry is in this city specifically. The authorities clearly wanted to make an example out of them. Of course, Morikawa and Jeremy didn't have $5 million to post bail, so both of them went to jail. And not just any jail. They were placed in a high-security prison, treated like they were dangerous, high-level criminals. Imagine that even in a place filled with the most hardened criminals, the massive bail amount they set for him made him kind of a celebrity among the inmates. Some prisoners would say to Morikawa, "Wow, your bail is $5 million. You must have done something really terrible, like a huge crime." So you can imagine their shock when they found out all he did was counterfeit casino chips. The whole bail thing even got the other prisoners to introduce Morikawa to another inmate whose bail was even higher. They'd say, "See that guy? His bail's even more than yours." And that's how Morikawa got to know this inmate. He was Russian and had connections to some dangerous Russian gangs, hence the high bail. Morikawa wasn't used to mingling with people like that, but he found himself in this situation, so he started talking and interacting with the Russian guy. During their conversations, Morikawa told him his story, how they faked the chips and stole from the casinos. The Russian gangster was fascinated. He really liked the idea. It felt to him like Morikawa had struck gold, so he kept pressing for more details. Eventually, the guy expressed interest in going into business with Morikawa after they got out. He thought Morikawa was smart and sharp, and suggested that once they're out, they meet up and explore business opportunities together. Morikawa was a bit surprised by the offer. He never imagined himself getting into business with real gangsters. So in that moment, he just gave a polite, non-committal answer. Sure. When we get out, we'll see what opportunities are there and meet up." A few days passed and Morikawa and Jeremy were still in jail. But Morikawa managed to hire a strong lawyer who specialized in defending criminals. This lawyer filed an appeal and succeeded in getting the bail reduced from $5 million to just $12,000. What helped Morikawa here was his clean record. He didn't have any priors. So he paid the $12,000 and was released on bail. As for his friend Jeremy, unfortunately, he had a criminal record, and there was also an outstanding arrest warrant for him in another state, California. Because of that, his bail wasn't reduced, and he had to stay in jail. Morikawa was out now, but of course, he was still waiting for his trial, which could drag on for months, maybe even a year or more. His new problem: he'd lost his source of income. All his expenses and his family's were covered by the money he made from the counterfeiting scheme. Now, on top of that, he had a new financial burden: legal fees. His lawyer wasn't cheap. If Morikawa wanted to keep him on the case, he had to keep paying him, and those payments had to continue until the case ended. So once again, Morikawa found himself in a tough financial spot. Debt and bills started piling up. Day by day, things kept getting harder. He had some cash stashed away here and there, but it started disappearing fast. Even after selling many of his belongings, he still couldn't make ends meet or find a new source of income to support himself and his family. Days and months passed slowly, and we reached 2006. With his debts piling up and his sense of despair growing stronger, Morikawa felt like he had no option left but to reach out to the Russian gangster he had met in prison, who had also been released during those months. As requested, they met up, sat down together, and started talking business and exploring opportunities they could work on together. The Russian asked Morikawa to teach him how to make counterfeit chips. Naturally, Morikawa was hesitant. He knew that if he got caught again, it wouldn't be as easy to get out as it was the first time. His case was still in court, and he was only out on bail. This was a major risk, but with the crushing debt and his worsening financial situation, he didn't have any other choice. He had reached rock bottom. In the end, he and the Russian struck a deal. Morikawa would teach and train the Russian and his crew on how to make the fake chips, and they would handle the entire operation, manufacturing the chips, going to the casinos, gambling, and cashing them out. His only job was to train them. In exchange, he'd get a 25% cut of the profits. At least this time, Morikawa wouldn't have to risk going into the casinos himself. So, Morikawa began training the Russians on how to forge the chips. Sometimes he trained them in his garage, in the same workshop where he and Jeremy used to work. Other times, he'd go to their place, their headquarters or their homes, and train them there. He always tried to be careful with his movements. Even when meeting up with them, he'd take side streets or longer routes, always watching his back to make sure no one was following him. After training them for a while and feeling they had reached a decent level, the gang began their operation. They started producing the chips the way Morikawa had shown them and went to the casinos to gamble using the fake chips. Afterwards, they'd go to the cashiers and exchange them for real money. But the problem was that the Russians weren't as skilled as Morikawa, even after all the training. The quality of the counterfeit chips just wasn't the same. They lacked the same passion for perfection that Morikawa had. He came from a construction and contracting background, and he had a precision in how he made things. These guys were just gangsters with no hands-on experience or craftsmanship. During their runs in the casinos, one of the casino staff noticed something off about a few of the chips. When he placed the counterfeit ones next to the real ones, he saw they looked different. The color and the line patterns weren't quite right. They were close, but something was off. So the employee reported it to his superiors. Upon closer inspection, they confirmed the chips were fake. Law enforcement was notified, and the Gaming Control Board was brought in to investigate and track down whoever was using the counterfeit chips. Naturally, the first thing they did was review the security footage. They were able to identify several members of the Russian gang and realized this was a bigger operation, clearly the work of an organized group, not just one or two people. At that point, they weren't sure if Morikawa was involved, but they did suspect that only two people had the skill to make chips at this level, Morikawa and Jeremy. And since Jeremy was still in prison, all eyes turned to Morikawa. However, surveillance footage showed that Morikawa wasn't physically present at any of the casinos. In fact, he wasn't even allowed in. They had blacklisted him. It was clear to the investigators that this time, a whole gang was behind the operation. They managed to identify several gang members and form surveillance teams to track their movements. The goal was to follow them back to the source, to bring down the entire operation in one sweep, along with the mastermind behind it all. During the surveillance operation, the agents followed some members of the gang to Morikawa's house. They saw them enter his home because, as we mentioned, Morikawa would sometimes train the Russians in his garage workshop. He was still actively training them to help them perfect the process of making the chips. He had no idea that the whole thing had already been exposed. Of course, when the agents followed the gang members to Morikawa's house, they immediately realized who the mastermind behind the operation was and understood how the gang was able to produce the counterfeit chips. The agents decided to raid Morikawa's house and catch him and the gang members red-handed. And sure enough, at that moment, Morikawa was in the garage with them, surrounded by all the tools, dyes, and equipment. The agents surrounded the house from all sides to make sure no one could escape. One of them approached the door and knocked hard, yelling, "Authorities, open the door." Morikawa's heart sank. Everything was out in the open. The chips, the tools, the dyes, all sitting on the table. His mind was racing, trying to figure out where he could hide them. He looked at the floor, the ceiling. There was nowhere. Before he could even gather his thoughts, the agents stormed the house, and everything was laid bare. Morikawa raised his hands and surrendered. Morikawa was arrested for the second time and sent back to prison, just 8 months after he'd been released. At that point, He truly believed his life was over. He was certain he'd be given a heavy sentence that would lock him away for years. He didn't think there was any way out, and that's when his sharp, seasoned defense attorney stepped in again. The sane one known for defending criminals. This lawyer was clever and knew exactly how to defend Morikawa in an incredible way. Believe it or not, he managed to get Morikawa off without a prison sentence. That doesn't mean Morikawa was found innocent. No, he actually pled guilty to 6 charges in court, but the sentence the lawyer secured for him was 5 years of probation and community service. Probation meant he wouldn't go to jail and could live freely. But during those 5 years, he had to be extremely careful. If he broke the law or committed even a minor offense, he'd be locked up immediately and hit with a severe sentence. So he had to stay on the straight and narrow. As for community service, it meant he had to complete a set number of hours doing volunteer work, like cleaning the city or helping charities in similar tasks. All in all, it was considered a very favorable sentence given what he'd done. At least he wouldn't be going to prison. What helped reduce the sentence, besides the lawyer's skill, was the fact that they couldn't prove the full amount of counterfeit chips he had made. Imagine, the chips they were able to tie to him were only valued at $36,000, even though Morikawa later admitted, after the case was over, that they'd actually surpassed $1 million in counterfeit chips.
Restitution is at $36,000 is what they could only find in the chips. I think we did over $1 million. And they claim that they're probably still in circulation. They can't even find them.
Imagine, out of that entire million, they were only able to pin $36,000 on him. And that's what helped reduce his sentence. Part of the judgment was that he had to return that $36,000. Just think about it. His precision and skill in forgery actually saved him even after he got caught. Most of the chips he forged were never found. Casinos had already started using them alongside the original ones because the fakes were so well made. They got mixed in with the real chips to the point where it was impossible to tell them apart. Morikawa says he's reformed now, and there's no way he'd ever go back and try something like that again. He admits the money was good and easy, but it's not worth risking your life, or your family's, for it. As for his partner Jeremy, he spent a few years in prison for previous charges and eventually got out. Morikawa's story was like a slap in the face to casinos and the chip system they use as currency. After that case, all the major casinos added a small electronic chip called RFID to their casino chips. Today, every chip in any casino has one of these embedded inside. The chip's job is to identify the chip, its value, type, and sometimes even track its location within the casino. Now they use scanners or special radio readers for these chips. These scanners are placed on gaming tables and at cashier counters, and they instantly detect the embedded chips and determine their value and quantity. So even if someone, for example, took a $1 chip, painted it, modified it, and turned it into a $100 chip like Morikawa used to do, these devices would expose it right away as only worth $1. That's why counterfeiting chips has become nearly impossible nowadays. And it's all thanks to the star of our story today, Morikawa. And that brings us to the end of our story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.